Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Sunday morning in the old cookbook show. Today we're going to do a recipe out of this cookbook, the Toronto Queen City of Canada Cookbook. This was published in 1915. It is a community cookbook. And community cookbooks from this time period, in community cookbooks in general, from all time periods, have this thing where they will place multiple recipes with the same name in the cookbook from different people who have submitted them. This cookbook is no different. This cookbook has 5 different recipes for a cookie called Hermits. And I've chosen one of the recipes and we're going to make it today. But I find this fascinating, especially in the context of 2022, where there are so many gatekeepers out there telling us that we're doing recipes wrong, that there's only one way to make a recipe. They know the way to make it, and you're doing it wrong. I don't believe that mentality. I don't believe that mentality at all. And if anything, that mentality sort of bothers me a lot, because the farther back you go into cookbooks, this one's from 1915, but the farther you go back in cookbooks, even cookbooks that were curated, that weren't community cookbooks, will have 2 or 3 recipes for the same dish that differ. There were multiple paths to the same place, and it's not really until we get into the rise of the television chef that the whole thing goes off the rails, and we've been led to believe that there's only one way to make things. Every family has their own way to make a dish, and even those dishes that are thought of as ultra-traditional have multiple paths. So, the butter is creaming, and I've put the sugar in. We'll let that come together until it's light and fluffy. At their core, all of these hermit recipes are essentially what in Canada and the United States we would call a cookie, baked. Either dropped, or some of them, though, are rolled and cut. At their core, sugar and a fat, and that fat could have been butter, lard, or shortening, even though lard and butter are both shortenings. There was a raisin component, and there could have been raisins, or it could have been currants, even though currants are a type of raisin, and some of them had both. There's a chopped nut component, could have been any nut. There is a spice component, and in this case we have cinnamon, allspice, and nutmeg. Allspice seems to be in most of them, but the other, there's cloves in some of them don't have nutmeg, that sort of thing. So it calls for half a nutmeg. There's 4 cups of flour, so half a nutmeg might be okay. Okay, I think I can put the eggs in now. So I'm going to crack the eggs in one at a time. And the second egg. Now, for a liquid component, this recipe calls for sour milk. So, at a 1/4 cup of buttermilk. Today's buttermilk is the equivalent of sour milk in this time period. This is soured milk. Some of the recipes call for sweet milk, which in today's language is just milk, regular milk, sweet milk. Has nothing to do with it having sugar in it or being sweetened. It's just not sour. And some of them called for hot water. So, I'm not sure. I think the soured milk or the buttermilk would add a really nice tang to the cookies. We'll find out. There's some baking soda. I'm supposed to mix the baking soda into the soured milk, which will start the reaction right away. So, let's move a little bit quickly. So just mix that flour and spice together. And I'll start spooning that in to the butter, sugar, egg mixture. A little bit of the milk. A little bit of the flour. Now the recipe says 4 cups of flour or maybe a little less. I'm thinking maybe a little less than 4 cups is the way to go. So I've got some raisins and currants, also known as Zante currants or Corinthian raisins, And the recipe says walnuts, so of course I'm going to use pecans. The only baking instructions are drop on buttered tins and bake. I generally don't butter my cookie tin. I will sometimes put a piece of parchment paper on, but for the most part I don't find that cookies stick. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to risk and just put them on an unbuttered tin. And I'll probably only bake 1 tin's worth for now. I'll put the rest of them on a baking sheet really close together, stick them in the freezer, freeze them, and then put them in an airtight container and take them out and bake them, 6 at a time after supper on nights when I don't really feel like making a whole batch of cookies, and just bake a few at a time. So I've got the oven preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to stick these in and I'll bake them for probably 12 minutes. I'll come back and look at them at 12 minutes and see how they're doing. They might take 12 to 15.
Hey Glenn, that smells pretty good.
Yes, this is shrimp jambalaya for next Sunday's show.
That's a long wait.
It is a long wait. We've got hermits.
Cookies!
Hermits.
Hermits is an interesting name. But this is not what not that I can tell you what I'm thinking about when I hear the word hermits, but for some reason, not these.
I don't know that I've ever had a hermit. I might have had a hermit, but it doesn't jump out in my brain. There's 5 different recipes in the Toronto Cookbook for hermits, and they're all a little bit different. The only sort of binding thing is it's a cookie. There's raisins or currants, sometimes both. There's a nut, and some spicing.
Now, are there 5 recipes because 5 different people submitted it?
Yeah, so
clearly they were popular cookies at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, good cookie. Like many cookies, you could put any dried fruit, any nut, and that would work.
Yeah. Well, based on what's in there, yes. Dried cherries would go really well in there. Dried cranberries would be really good in there.
You could call them a larder cookie. Anything from your larder, throw it in.
Change up the spicing a little bit. Put in different spices. You could make them almost Christmas flavored, like Christmas cake. Put in peel. And a little, instead of the milk, put in brandy.
My Aunt Eleanor does a recipe that's kind of like that.
Yeah.
With cookies and muffins, too.
Yeah. So, there's a lot that you could play with that recipe. And it's obvious.
Cardamom?
Cardamom would be really good in that, yeah. And it's obvious from, the plethora of recipes that people did play with it and just made it their own.
There you go.
Make it your own.
It's not a new idea.
No, not at all.
Glenn, you can't own that.
No. So, the hermit. Does your family make hermits? And what do you put in your hermits?
There you go.
Thanks for stopping by. See you next Sunday for some jambalaya.